Once upon a time in a small village, there lived a girl named Unena, but everyone called her Une. She was unlike any other woman in the village, not because of her heart, which was kind and gentle, or because of her spirit, which was strong and unbreakable, but because of her appearance. Une was born with something that made the villagers whisper and stare. She had thick, dark beards on her face. Her body was strong and muscular, resembling that of a man. From a young age, she was different, and the villagers made sure she never forgot it. The women in the village mocked her, saying she was not truly one of them. She looks more like a man than a woman, they would say, their laughter echoing through the air. The men did not treat her any better. No matter how kind or caring she was, they avoided her. They found her appearance strange and unnatural. Who will marry a woman with beards? They joked amongst themselves, unaware of the pain their words caused. Une tried her best to fit in, but it seemed that no one wanted to be her friend. The other girls in the village would not speak to her, let alone walk beside her. They were too busy gossiping and laughing behind her back. She's only friends with the boys because she looks like one, they teased. It was true that Une found more comfort in the company of some boys, but it was not because she felt like one of them. It was simply because they were the only ones who did not shun her completely. With the boys, she could at least talk and laugh, even if they still saw her as different. Among these boys was Kelechi, a kind young man with a heart as big as Une's. Kelechi was not like the others. He saw beyond Une's appearance and admired her for who she was, her strength, her kindness, and her resilience. While others mocked, Kelechi was the one who stood by her side. They would sit by the river, talking about everything and nothing. And in those moments, Une forgot about the cruelty of the world. As time passed, Kelechi's feelings for Une deepened. It was not just friendship that he felt, it was love. He admired her courage and the way she remained kind despite the harshness of the villagers. One day, while sitting by the riverbank, Kelechi took Une's hand in his. Une, he said softly, I don't care what others think. I see your heart, and it is beautiful. I love you. Une's heart swelled with happiness. After years of rejection, someone had finally seen her for who she truly was. Tears filled her eyes as she squeezed Kelechi's hand. I love you too, she whispered, feeling for the first time that perhaps her life would not be so lonely after all. For 2 blissful weeks, Une and Kelechi lived in their own world, a world where the harsh whispers of the village faded into the background, replaced by the warmth of their growing bond. Every morning, they met by the riverbank, their favorite spot, where the gentle sound of the flowing water seemed to carry their quiet conversations and shared laughter far from the judgmental eyes of the villagers. Kelechi would bring her wildflowers he'd picked along the way, offering them to Une with a shy smile, and she would blush, feeling an unfamiliar flutter of happiness in her heart. He always admired the strength in her, the way she stood tall despite the harshness of life, and how she carried herself with grace even when others treated her as an outcast. Une, in turn, loved the tenderness in Kelechi's eyes, the way he looked at her not as a woman with a beard or an oddity, but simply as someone worthy of love. They would walk together through the village, their hands brushing lightly, or sit together under the shade of a giant baobab tree, exchanging stories and dreams of a future they longed to build. Kelechi would often share his hopes of traveling to the city, where they could start fresh and leave behind the cruelty of the village. Une would smile at him, imagining a life with him where they could be happy without the weight of judgment upon them. At night, Kelechi would come to visit Une at her hut, simply sitting quietly beside her, as they watched the stars twinkle in the sky. For those 2 weeks, their love bloomed in secret, hidden from the prying eyes of the village that still whispered about Une's unusual appearance. But the villagers are not blind. Slowly, words began to spread. At first, it was the subtle things, the way Kelechi would linger near Une's home after dark, or the way Une's eyes would light up when he approached. The quiet whispers became louder, and soon enough, the village gossipers began piecing the puzzle together. Have you noticed how Kelechi and Une have been spending a lot of time together? One of the women asked as she pounded yam with her pestle. It's strange, don't you think? They're always meeting by the river. I heard they were just friends, another woman replied, but her voice was laced with doubt. But now, I am not so sure. It's almost like they are close, you know? The gossip spread quickly, and soon, the entire village was buzzing with speculation. Women stared at Une as she passed by, their whispers growing more malicious. Unena is always with Kelechi. Is he going to marry her? They would mutter. Some shook their heads, disapproving, while others whispered behind their hands, wondering if the rumors were true. Une, blissfully unaware of the growing stir in the village, was simply happy to be with Kelechi. For once, she didn't feel different. She didn't feel like an outsider. She felt loved. She felt seen. But then, one afternoon, as Kelechi and Une sat under a tree, the quietness was suddenly shattered by the arrival of Kelechi's sister, Adaeze. Her face was twisted with disbelief as she approached them, her hands on her hips. Kelechi, what is going on here? Adaeze demanded, her voice sharp. I've been hearing rumors about you and Une. Is it true? Kelechi looked up at his sister, startled. He had hoped to keep their relationship a secret for a little longer, but now it seemed the village had caught on. He glanced at Une, her face showing a mix of surprise and concern, before turning back to Adaeze. It's true, Kelechi said, his voice steady. I love Une, and that's all there is to it. Adaeze's eyes widened in shock. You can't be serious, Kelechi. You know how the village talks about her. They are always saying things, and if you marry her, the shame will fall on our family. You're making a mistake. But Kelechi remained calm. I don't care what the village says. I love Une, and nothing else matters. Adaeze's face twisted with frustration. You are being foolish, she snapped, before storming off in anger, leaving Kelechi and Une in stunned silence. It didn't take long before the rest of the village knew for sure. Whispers became shouts, and the news traveled faster than ever. Kelechi and Une were no longer just friends. They were a couple, and their love was the talk of the entire village. Some were shocked, others disapproving, but many were simply curious, wondering how it was even possible that Kelechi, a young man with so much promise, could love a woman with such a unique appearance. The reactions were mixed. Some of the younger villagers, especially the men, seemed fascinated by the relationship. They were intrigued by Kelechi's bravery in choosing Une despite her beards and muscular build. But the older women and elders in the village were less forgiving. They saw it as an embarrassment, a mistake that would bring shame upon Kelechi's family. The news reached Kelechi's mother, a stern woman who believed in tradition and appearances. She became furious. She could not understand why her son would choose to marry someone like Une. This cannot happen, Kelechi's mother declared one evening as the family gathered around the fire. Kelechi, you will not marry her. Do you want to be the laughingstock of the village? Think of our family's honor. Kelechi tried to argue, but his mother would not listen. Day after day, his family bombarded him with reasons why he could not marry Une. His sisters chimed in, saying that no one would respect him if he married a woman with a beard. You deserve better, Kelechi. They would say, you deserve a woman who looks like a woman. Despite their harsh words, Kelechi remained steadfast. He loved Une and did not care about what others thought. But one day, during yet another argument with his mother, she said something that struck him deeply. "Kelechi," she began, her voice low and serious, "do you see how the villagers mock her? Do you want your children to suffer the same fate? If you marry her, your daughters might be like her. Is that the life you want for your children?" Kelechi froze. He had never thought of it that way. The idea of his children being mocked and rejected, just like Une, filled him with fear. He loved her, but the thought of bringing children into a world where they might suffer because of their appearance was unbearable. For days, Kelechi wrestled with his emotions. He loved Une with all his heart, but his mother's word haunted him. Eventually, the fear became too much to bear. He could not bring himself to face Une and tell her the truth, so he made a decision. He would leave the village. Without a word to anyone, Kelechi packed his belongings and left in the dead of night. He traveled far, hoping that distance would make him forget the love he had left behind. Une waited for days, then weeks, but Kelechi never returned. She asked his sisters where he had gone, but they only mocked her, laughing at her hopefulness. "He's gone. Une, why would he stay for someone like you?" they sneered. When the news finally spread that Kelechi had left the village, Une was heartbroken. How could he leave without saying goodbye? How could he abandon her like that after everything they had shared? The pain of his departure was deep and Une felt more alone than ever. She decided that no man would ever want her. After all the rejections she had faced, she finally accepted that her appearance would always stand in the way of her happiness. Meanwhile, Kelechi's life took a different turn. After he left the village in the dead of night, guilt and regret became his constant companions. The city he fled to was far enough that no one knew his story, but not far enough to erase the memories of what he had left behind. He tried to build a new life, but no matter how hard he worked, something was missing. Kelechi found a job as a farmhand in the city, working long hours under the sun, trying to forget the love he had abandoned. But every evening, when the day's work was done and the silence of the night crept in, his thoughts would drift back to Une. He would remember her laughter by the river, the kindness in her eyes, and the way she had always seen the best in him, even when he doubted himself. He had left because of fear. Fear that his children would suffer as Une had. Fear that villagers' mockery would never cease. Fear that he would never be strong enough to stand by her side against the world. But in the weeks and months that followed, Kelechi realized that the only thing worse than facing those fears was living without Une. The emptiness inside him grew, gnawing at him until he could no longer ignore it. One day, Une made a decision. If no man wanted her in the village, she would leave and start a new life somewhere else. The following week, Une packed her things and traveled to the city. But this time, she was determined to be different. She began covering her head and face with a scarf, hiding her beards from the world, and dressed in oversized clothes to cover her body. Life in the city was tough. Une struggled to find work, and her first attempt at starting a small business failed miserably, but she refused to give up. She decided to learn a new skill, makeup artistry. Though it was challenging, she poured all her energy into mastering the craft. Gradually, things began to change. One day, Une did the makeup of a young woman who was so thrilled with her new look that she couldn't stop smiling. The woman posted pictures online, tagging Une in the post. Soon, more people began to notice her work, and before long, Une's skills were in high demand. Celebrities began booking her for events, and her life turned around completely. Men began to notice her too. They were drawn to her talent and the mystery behind her always covered face. But Une was not interested. She had learned a lesson. She kept her distance, focusing on her career and keeping her secret safe. As the years passed, Une's life became comfortable and successful. But as she grew older, she realized that something was missing. She had achieved so much, but she was lonely. She knew that no man would ever marry her, so she decided that she would have a child on her own. Une began to open her heart a little, allowing a few men to get close to her. That was when she met Shola. He was different from the others. He was kind, affectionate, and patient. Shola assumed that Une covered her face for religious reasons and never questioned it. They grew closer, and one night, after spending an evening together, Shola noticed that she still wore her scarf even in bed. Curious, he gently pulled it off while she slept. When he saw the beads, he was shocked. He woke her up and asked, "Is this why you've been covering your face? Because of the beads?" Une braced herself for rejection, but Shola surprised her. "Whoever loves you will love you for who you are, beards and all," he said softly. But Une wasn't interested in love. She was focused on her goal of having a child. She explained this to Shola, and though he was disappointed, he understood. They continued their relationship, but Une's heart remained guarded. 2 months later, Une discovered she was pregnant. She was overjoyed but didn't bother telling Shola. She had what she wanted, a child of her own, but fate had other plans. Shola, who had been researching ways to help her stop the beards from growing, returned to visit her after being away for some months. When he saw her pregnant, he was shocked. He thought she had moved on and was carrying another man's child. Feeling betrayed, Shola confronted her, but Une confessed that the baby was his. Overwhelmed with joy, Shola embraced her, apologizing for not talking to her for the past months. He also shared the result of his research, a remedy that could help stop the growth of her beards. Reluctantly, Une tried the remedy. Slowly but surely, the beard stopped growing. For the first time in her life, Une began to feel truly comfortable in her skin. She and Shola grew closer, and though she had never sought love, she found it in him. As the months passed and her pregnancy progressed, Une realized that she had finally found a place where she belonged. It wasn't just about appearances or what others thought of her. It was about finding someone who accepted her for who she truly was. Shola proved to be that person, the one who saw beyond her appearance and loved her unconditionally. When Une finally gave birth, it was a joyous occasion. She held her baby girl in her arms, overwhelmed with love and gratitude. Shola was by her side, beaming with pride. Together, they named their daughter Modupe, which means "I am grateful," for she was a symbol of beauty that had come from all their trials, and her heart was filled with gratitude. As Une looked down at her daughter, she saw a reflection of herself in the child's innocent face, but there were no signs of the beards that had marked her own life with so much pain. Modupe's skin was smooth, and her features were delicate. Une's heart swelled with relief and happiness. Her daughter would not suffer the same fate she had. Life in the city continued to be kind to Une and Shola. With Shola's support, Une's makeup business flourished even more, and she became one of the most sought-after makeup artists in the city. Her reputation for transforming people's appearances was unmatched, and she used her success to help others who had faced rejection and ridicule. Une began offering free makeup classes to young women who were struggling, teaching them the skills that had helped her turn her life around. She became a mentor to many, sharing her story and encouraging them to embrace who they were, no matter what others thought. Her kindness and generosity won her even more admiration, and soon she was known not just for her talent, but for her heart. As Modupe grew, Une and Shola raised her with love and wisdom. They taught her to be strong, to be proud of who she was, and to never let anyone's words define her worth. Modupe blossomed into a confident and beautiful young girl, full of joy and laughter. But even as Une found happiness, She never forgot the village she had left behind. One day, she decided it was time to return. She had changed so much, and she wanted to show the people who had once mocked her what she had become. When Une and Shola arrived in the village with Modupe, the villagers were stunned. They could hardly recognize Une. The bearded girl they had once ridiculed was now a confident, successful woman. She carried herself with grace, and the love between her and Shola was clear to see. Many of the villagers, including those who had been the cruelest to her, approached her with apologies. They were ashamed of how they had treated her and were amazed by how she had turned her life around. But Une held no bitterness in her heart. She forgave them, for she had learned that holding on to anger would only weigh her down. Une's return to the village was a moment of triumph, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever felt like they didn't belong. Her story became a legend, passed down from generation to generation. Parents would tell their children about Une, the girl with the beard who had been rejected by everyone, only to rise above it all and find love, success, and happiness. Une and her family returned to the city, her life filled with purpose and new opportunities. But the news of her visit to the village, her success and transformation reached Kelechi. That night, Kelechi couldn't sleep. The thought of Une, successful and beloved in the city, filled him with both pride and sorrow. He was proud of what she had accomplished, but the sorrow came from knowing that he had not been there to support her, to stand by her side as she made her dreams come true. Driven by a need to make things right, Kelechi made a decision. He would go to the city and find Une. He would beg for her forgiveness, even if it was too late for them to be together. He just needed to tell her that he had never stopped loving her. The journey to the city was long and difficult. As he traveled, he rehearsed what he would say to her, but nothing seemed right. How could he explain why he had left? How could he ask for forgiveness when he had caused her so much pain? When he finally arrived in the city, he began asking around for Une. After so much trouble, Kelechi finally found the building where Une's studio was located. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached the door. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if he had the right to see her after everything he had done. But then, he thought of the time they had spent together, of the love they had shared, and he knew he had to try. Inside the studio, Kelechi was greeted by the sight of women sitting in front of mirrors, having their makeup done by Une's assistants. The air was filled with the sound of laughter and chatter. He spotted Une across the room, her back turned to him as she walked on a client. For a moment, Kelechi felt frozen in place, unable to move or speak. But then, Une turned around and their eyes met. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Une's face was a mixture of shock and confusion. She had never expected to see Kelechi again, especially not here, in the life she had built without him. Finally, she found her voice. Kelechi, what are you doing here? Kelechi swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. Une, I came to see you, to apologize. I never should have left. I was a coward. I let my fears control me and I hurt you in the process, but I never stopped loving you. I just couldn't face the thought of our children. Une's expression softened, but there was still a distance in her eyes. You left without a word, Kelechi. You made your choice, and I made mine. I've moved on. I've built a life here. I'm happy. Kelechi nodded, his heart heavy with regrets. I know, and I'm so proud of you, Une. You've become everything I knew you could be. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to tell you that I am sorry. I needed to see you one last time. Une looked at him for a long moment, then sighed. I've forgiven you, Kelechi, a long time ago. But forgiveness doesn't mean things can go back to the way they were. I've moved on. Kelechi lowered his head, knowing that she was right. I understand. I just wanted to tell you that and to wish you happiness, Une. You deserve it. With that, Kelechi turned to leave, but as he reached the door, Une called out to him, "Wait, Kelechi." He turned back, hope flickering in his heart. Une walked over to him, her eyes filled with a mix of emotions. "You don't have to leave. We may not be able to go back to what we were, but that doesn't mean we can't be friends. We've both grown and maybe, just maybe, we can find a way forward together, as friends." Kelechi smiled, a tear slipping down his cheek. "I would like that, Une. I would like that a lot." And so, Kelechi stayed. They took their time getting to know each other again, this time as the people they had become. The pain of the past slowly faded, replaced by a new understanding. Though their relationship wasn't the same as it once was, it grew into something meaningful. Kelechi found work in the city, building a life that was meaningful and fulfilling. He became a supportive presence in her life, a friend who understood her struggles and celebrated her successes. As the years passed, Une and Kelechi found peace in each other's company. They weren't the same people they had been in the village, but that was okay. They had both learned, grown, and found their own paths. And as the years passed, Une continued to live a life filled with purpose and love. She and Shola had more children, each one a blessing in their lives. Though the birds had once defined her, they were now just a part of her past. A past that she had overcome with courage and grace. In the end, Une realized that true beauty was not in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. And with that knowledge, she lived happily ever after, surrounded by the love of her family and the admiration of all who knew her. Like this video if you enjoyed this story. Subscribe for more interesting stories than this. See you in the next one. Goodbye.